I think that's the kind of the core optimism is everybody's seeing improvement, and it is substantial improvement.
Welcome to Season 7 of Bridge the Gap, a podcast dedicated to informing, educating, and influencing the future of housing and services for seniors. Powered by sponsors AccuShield, Align, NIC MAP Vision, ProCare HR, Sage, Hamilton Captel, ServiceMaster, The Bridge Group Construction, and Solinity, and produced by Solinity Marketing.
Welcome to Bridge the Gap Podcast, this senior living podcast with Josh and Lucas here in DC at the Fall NIC Conference with a great friend and a returning guest and a great partner to the program, Arick Morton. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure and honor to be here, and excited to see how far you've come over all these years.
Yes. Well, our audience is probably like, oh yeah, we know Arick. We're looking forward to this data dump. Obviously, for those that don't know, Arick is NIC MAP Vision. It is the pinnacle, the nadir of data in our industry. And we do this quarterly where you come on and bring the good information that people pay a lot of money for, and rightfully so, to give our audience and the industry a great access to this information. So let's roll right into it. Give us the update for this quarter.
You know, we have data coming out here next week. And I mean, the story of the third quarter is really honestly kind of more of the same. So we're seeing absorption kind of remain at those historically elevated levels, pretty much in line with last year's performance, you know, depending on what kind of how you cut the market. But I think, you know, at a macro level, we're still seeing those absorption rates that are, you know, very historically elevated versus kind of anything we've ever seen pre-COVID. That's on the demand side. And you know, there's kind of some interesting sub components to that, but I would say the y-intercept of kind of where exactly the levels are for various primary markets, secondary markets, additional markets, or ILAL memory care, you know, there's some variability in there, but the slope of the line is pretty consistent. So we're seeing pretty uniform growth kind of across the board. On the supply side, the kind of historically low construction starts and supply growth continues. So we didn't see any kind of major pop in new construction starts. We're still plumbing, you know, pretty much historical lows that we haven't seen since, you know, the great financial crisis. So I think, you know, if you're kind of zooming out a little bit and looking at that macro picture that we've been talking about, you know, I think it continues apace. We're seeing the growth come, and then we're not seeing the supply keep pace.
It's positive. So we're here at the NIC conference in DC. Arick, I think everybody that we've been talking to, and even it's kind of hard to put a pulse on it. It feels positive, like way more positive than in previous years. And it's exciting. I feel like this boost of energy into our industry, although you're saying it's kind of just continuing steady, which is a good thing. But what do you think is attributing to this positive vibe? Are you sensing that? Are you hearing
absolutely. It? Absolutely. Well, I heard that, you know, a lot of banks are the regulator is allowing a lot of banks who kind of, if there's a positive story about their senior housing assets, to kind of continue to, you know, let those loans extend, and not, you know, really forcing people to kind of, you know, refi in distress or to sell in distress. And I think that's because, and what we've seen is that kind of wall of maturities hasn't really caused a lot of kind of distressed sales, and certainly not what people thought at the beginning of the year. And I think what that tells you is that the majority of the buildings in senior housing, even those that might have loans that are due or are kind of underwater, have a story that is positive enough that it makes sense to kind of ride the bus. And so I think that's the kind of the core optimism is everybody's seeing improvement, and it is substantial improvement. You know, it is in line with a historically elevated level. And then at the same time, you have kind of the capital market starting to soften a little bit. We just got 50 bips on the rate cut. You know, the banks are starting to open up a little bit, and I think people are kind of seeing, you know, 2026, 2027 is really setting up. You have this incredible demographic growth, you know, that the legacy of the supply constraints are going to echo for years to come. And then if you have a more accommodative interest rate policy, you know, that could set up for truly incredible conditions. So, I mean, I think people are seeing that. They're seeing their NOIs up, they're seeing margins up, you know, kind of across the board. And then they see an incredibly bright future that's, you know, not decades away, but, you know, years away or months away in some cases.
And that's probably a segue, and you kind of started to touch on it, I think, but forecasting over the next 12 months, from the data trends you're seeing, kind of what we're all kind of hearing about's happening. There's, I feel like developers, owners, capital partners are probably more sophisticated than ever in their approach because of the data that you guys provide to them. I mean, it's more accessible than it's ever been. You know, I think about 10 years ago, you would have had to have a whole data analytics team in-house to try to figure out what you guys put at our fingertips. How do you think that's changing, like what our industry is delivering to the consumer? I mean, from your perspective, I mean, you get to see all these different developers. What's changing over the next 12 months based on data?
I think the big question when it comes to development specifically, I mean, I think right now what we're seeing is that acquisition prices are still at a place where, you know, if you're going to put $1 of incremental capital to work, it's probably there's probably a higher return to buying than there is building. Seeing a lot of activity around expansions. I think that's, you know, I think in the short term, that's where we're going to see a lot of the development come from, is in people saying, hey, I got flag land and I see we're at 87 or 88 or 89 now, but I see that 92, 95 coming. And so, you know, if I could pop out a memory care expansion or an NAL expansion, you know, I can get that at an incredibly high gross margin. So I think that's really where, you know, a lot of the focus is right now. I think the developers are still kind of they're still circling a little bit. I think, you know, in terms of kind of how we're seeing developers enhance the sophistication of the product they're bringing to the market. You know, I think psychographics is a really big piece of that. You know, something that we spent a long time putting together, but finally got it, and I'm so excited about it, is kind of age by income by psychographic. That's something that really doesn't exist anywhere else in the market. So now if you think about, you know, a lot of the psychographics are interesting, but they're kind of broad categories. But now what we can do is say, all right, in this 15-minute drive time or this 20-minute drive time, you know, here are the specific personas who have, you know, the age and the income qualification, which, you know, you can't lose sight of those two. And now I can really think about how I amenitize my buildings, how I position the units, and then how I strategically kind of approach the market. And so I think that this cycle, you know, is going to be something that historically nobody has really been able to use that or take advantage of that. And I think now that's something that you can get that answer in, you know, 2 clicks of a mouse. And so I think that's going to dramatically that's going to allow us to far more effectively tailor the product we deliver to the market than we've been able to in the past.
Interesting. So we probably don't have time, because I know you're very busy here at NIC, to unpack all of what I'm about to ask you. But, you know, the 3 things that I've been hearing over the last year, everybody's talking about to some level, is value-based care, active adult, and then middle market. And not all in the same flare, but how is NIC MAP Vision kind of approaching? I'm sure developers are all coming like, hey, we want to do active adult, we need data on this. Hey, we want to tap into this sector of the middle market, like we need data to support this. And then likewise. So how do you guys approach that from the research that you're doing and compiling all this together? I mean, what's your approach?
We're very fortunate to have, you know, to be kind of affiliated with NIC. So obviously they have an entire research team that, you know, not only do they do a lot of work on that, but they also have, you know, the Harvard Center for Housing and NORC and kind of folks like that who are bringing, you know, big guns to the research side. So we're incredibly integrated there, and we try to kind of start from first principles on a lot of these questions, and then, you know, say, all right, well, how does this system work? And then if you're going to implement or actuate this system in our industry, what are the data needs? And you kind of try to build up from first principles. So, you know, on a couple of things you asked about, you know, on value-based care, we have had, I mean, we can see inside of every senior housing property who are in terms of, from a resident healthcare utilization perspective, we can provide that data. This is in our platform today, as well as what are the outcomes, you know, falls, acuity, all those sorts of things. And then, and Medicare spend. And then, you know, we can also see all of the vendors who serve those communities already. So I think as people start to build, I think the biggest challenge thus far has been the industry, the healthcare side of the equation gobbles up that data. We work with all the value-based care people, folks who are, you know, chasing that space. On the operator or the investor side, I think, you know, where there's still work to do is kind of creating the thesis and really understanding, okay, like, how do I want to build this into my business? So the data's all there, but what I found is that there's still a lot of people who are kind of trying to put together what that thesis looks like.
Sure. That makes a lot of sense. So, Lucas, a lot to talk about. I mean, NIC is booming right here. NIC MAP Vision's at the center of everything, providing data to us. How does this impact what you're doing in the communities every day?
I'm taking notes too to take this back to my team. Obviously my time personally, or my day job, is really spent on the repositioning and refreshing of existing communities. And from my little data point is that we've seen a pretty big demand in that, and it's for all the reasons that you just mentioned. So final question. I don't want to let you go before we talk very briefly, or as briefly as you want to, about rates. We're here in DC at the time of this recording. We got an election coming up. There's the rates, everything is talking. How much is that driving conversation today? Or is it just kind of like a good thing, a little thing that just happened and people are just moving forward? Or is it a big driver in conversation right now?
Yeah, I think a little bit of that depends on what your projection is. I mean, 50 bips is helpful. That doesn't really probably change the equation in many cases. I think the question is, are we going to see another 100, 200? Where do we stop? I think the Fed has telegraphed, and the market is certainly priced in the idea that there's going to be more than 50, at least 150 or somewhere in that neighborhood. So I think at that point, what that does for the industry is, one, that helps a lot of assets that got, have debt on them that are at that, lower, even though rates might come down. There's a lot of people looking at an interest rate increase, right? Because they put the debt on there in 2020 or 2021 when there was zero interest rate policy. So I think that just helps kind of solve some of those problems. So I think that's certainly impacting it. I think development is tough to pencil. And so, 50, 100, 150 basis points on debt. I mean, the debt service on a development's probably, one of the larger kind of drivers of unlevered return once you pack in all the interest reserves. And so I think that's going to help unlock some of that. And then I think if you're, people are going to bet on cap rate compression, right? Because, if interest rates go down, mathematically or kind of economically, you would expect cap rates to come down with them. I think that's going to let people kind of say, well, that's a little close, but, I think we're going to get, 50 or 100 bips of cap rate compression. And so if that happens, I can make a good return on this. So, and then it also, I think, starts to solve some of the distress for the banks. As those rates come down, that will make a lot of things in the banking sector that are tight right now a little bit looser. So, I mean, I think all in all, it will be a boon for the industry, or helpful to the industry. I think the question is, like, how low do they go?
And the fact that we're having this conversation and you're having this conversation with all of these providers, it actually, it creates confidence and positive conversations that we've not really had a lot of great news over the last few years. So that's creating a buzz here at NIC that I haven't seen in years. And it's a lot of fun as not only looking in, but being in the industry. It's a lot of fun.
Great information. Thank you so much for spending time with us. We're going to let you get back to your other meetings here in Washington, D.C. And for all of our listeners that have been tuning into this, there's a whole library of content from NIC MAP Vision within the BTG universe. Go to btgvoice.com, go to the search button and type NIC MAP Vision, and you'll pull up all the content related to data and trends in the industry. Go ahead and binge watch that, and you'll have a master's degree in data instantly in a couple of shows. So, Arick, thanks for your time today.
Thank you both so much. It's a pleasure as always, and love what you're doing. Thank you so much for doing it.
Awesome. And thanks to all of our listeners for listening to another great episode of Bridge the Gap.
Thanks for listening to Bridge the Gap podcast with Josh and Lucas. Connect with the BTG Network team and use your voice to influence the industry by connecting with us at btgvoice.com.